Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Patrick Malaysia. I am the Secretary General of PIARC, the World Road Association, and I am very happy to be with you today for our webinar on the COVID-19 crisis. Our next presenter is from Malaysia. Dennis, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening from Malaysia. Next. Next. I'm Dennis Ganendra. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Minconsult. I was the Secretary General for 9 years of RAAAA, and currently I'm a council member. Next. Today I'll be telling you about the Malaysian experience, and I'll be covering these areas: the impacts of COVID-19 in Malaysia and the region, Malaysia's response to COVID-19, the impact on construction, the impact on road transport, the impact on other forms of transport, and some suggestions for the way forward in the short term and long term. As you can see, I'm covering quite a large area. My slides are quite detailed. There's a lot of information, which I think will be very useful for you. For the purposes of this presentation, I'm going to do a very quick overview of my slides. If you have any questions, you can ask me in the Q&A, and if you still have further questions, feel free to email me. So firstly, impacts of COVID in Malaysia and the region. Next. On the right-hand side is a table of the deaths and cases in various countries. Malaysia is at the bottom there. So you can see we've had about 6,600 cases and about 100 deaths. So in terms of per population, that's 206 cases per million population and about 3 deaths per million population. So we're about 100 times better than the worst affected countries. If you look at the table on the left-hand side, this looks at Malaysia vis-a-vis the other countries in Southeast Asia. And what you can see is that our situation is replicated in other countries in Southeast Asia, except for Indonesia and Philippines. Next. However, the impact in terms of economic impact on Malaysia has been severe. We're looking at least a 2% drop in GDP, most probably more, about 2.4 billion losses per day of the shutdown, and about 1 million people will lose their job as a result of this. So the economic impact has been tremendous and will be tremendous. Next. In Malaysia, we don't even have to just deal with COVID. We have other impacts we have to deal with. We had a change in government in March, which was very, very unexpected. And this government now has to stand up to a no confidence vote in the next couple of weeks. We've also had crashing oil prices, which is a key element of our economy to deal with. So as well as dealing with COVID, we've had to deal with other crises. Next. Next. But there have been some positive impacts of COVID, actually quite a few. Oh, go back one, Patrick. There have been some positive impacts of COVID, and in terms of the impact on the environment, it's been very positive. 50% reduction in waste thrown into the river in the Selangor Maritime Project, 43% reduction in waste thrown into the Klang River, air quality improved by 14%, river quality improved by 28%. Next. So how did Malaysia respond to COVID-19? So what we have here is a timeline of key events starting from 25th of January, the first case of COVID in Malaysia, until present day. What's in red is the key points in this story, which is in the 16th of March, the implementation of the control orders. And what you can see is every 2 weeks after that, approximately, we've had a different phase of the control order, essentially lifting it up until in the 4th of May, we had from a control order to a conditional control order, where essentially all businesses were open, but social distancing rules must apply. Next. And so this goes into a little bit more detail of it. Phase 1 of the MCO was very, very severe. Phase 2, equally severe. With phase 3, we opened up certain parts of the economy. And with phase 4, further parts of the economy opened. And now, in the current phase, what we call the conditional movement control order, very much most sectors of the economy are open now, but with social distancing rules. Next. What we have here is a plot of the infection rate, the bar chart, versus the recovery rate, which is the line, and shows you the different phases of the MCO that we applied. So you can see in the phase 1 and phase 2 of the MCO, the infection rate is very high, but you can see by the time we get to phase 3 and now phase 4 of the MCO, the infection rate has dropped significantly, and also the recovery rate is higher than the infection rate. Next. So what has been the impact of COVID on construction? Next. Firstly, you've got to appreciate, go back one. You've got to appreciate the importance of the construction industry in Malaysia. It's a US $30 billion industry representing 4.5% of the economy. We've got 95,000 contractors in the country and a workforce of about 850,000 people registered and a few hundred thousand unregistered people. Construction is a key driver of the economy with very fast impacts upwards and downwards. Next. So in terms of the key date impacts on the construction industry, on the 18th of March, we were asked to shut down completely. Go back one, Patrick. Back. On the 19th of March, down one. Perfect, that one. Okay, on the 19th of March, the next day, we were told that sites could operate just to safeguard the sites and also to make sure there's no hazard to the public. On the 23rd of March, some sites were open. On the 10th of April, engineering professional services were allowed to operate. 16th of April, other sites were allowed to open. But it's really on the 4th of May when all sectors were open that construction could really start. So what happens is, even though sites have got permission to operate, because the total supply chain was not there, they couldn't really do much work. This is in particular concrete suppliers. Next. When we're allowed to start work, there's a lot of rules and regulations and guidelines given to us by our government, which is all listed there. And some of the requirements are that all sites must have body temperature scanning both in and out daily, site employees to provide health declaration and go for COVID screening, social distancing within the site, 3-hourly disinfection of key areas. Initially, we had restricted hours, but that's been lifted recently. And all these rules also apply to the centralized labor quarters, not just the sites. Next. We have some excellent examples of contractors who've risen to the challenge and really adopted these very, very well. Next. But we also have some major challenges to the sector. Some contractors already in financial distress will be pushed over the edge and many bankruptcies are anticipated. A lot of workers have gone unpaid this last month. We have a government salary subsidy scheme, but it's only for nationals. So a lot of our foreign workers, registered and unregistered, have got unpaid, homeless and hungry. COVID screening is a so important element. It's expensive. It's $100 per test per person. There is a government paid testing scheme, but it's only for national. It will take time. And what we found is that government rules were applied to different degrees by different contractors. And sadly, we found that COVID clusters now have occurred at some construction sites. Next. So what has been the impact on road transport? So we explained a bit more detail of the control order in terms of road transport. So in the first phase, really, there was no cars allowed on the road except for essential services and buying amenities, and you couldn't go beyond 10 kilometers from your house, and it was restricted to one person per car. In phase 2, very much the same thing. In phase 3, now we're allowing some travel within the district and interstate, but with approval from the National Security Council. Next. Still one car per person. Next. And then in stage, oops, go back one. In stage 4, more countries were allowed to, more companies were allowed to travel during this period, and you went from 1 person to 2 persons per car ruling. And now in the CMCO, you can freely travel either for business or for personal reasons within the district. To go interstate, you need to get approval, and it's 4 persons per car ruling. Okay, of course, during this period, essential goods were able to travel. Next. So what has been the impact on the roads? Traffic demand has dropped dramatically. There has been a shift from public transport to private cars, but this is in no way offset the overall drop in traffic figures. So in terms of congestion, in Malaysia, it ranges between 60 to 90% in KL. This has dropped down to about 10% congestion in KL during the movement control order. And that congestion is really associated with police roadblocks. What we have here is the congestion levels in the last 7 days in 2020 and the last 7 days last year. And you can see the congestion levels were much higher last year than it is now. Next. In terms of nitrogen dioxide concentration, is reduced by 60%. There's been a 2-fold increase in good air quality. This is important. Traffic accidents has dropped significantly during the NCO. So pre-NCO, we looked at about 1,500 accidents per day and between 14 to 17 deaths a day. So during NCO, that rate has dropped to 371 cases or 5 deaths a day. So in terms of road deaths over this period, they've saved about 500 road deaths as opposed to the 100 deaths from COVID. So you could arguably say that COVID has saved lives in Malaysia. Next. Impact on toll roads has been very, very dramatic. Some concessionaires already in financial distress will be pushed to default. Some concessions with health cash flows will be able to weather this storm. Some research indicated the revenues will decrease by about 15% this year, assuming a 90% shortfall initially, increasing to 50% in the next month, and 30% in the next month, and then 10% in the following month. There's also impact on toll roads under construction. It's unlikely that they can meet their completion dates. And again, there will be pressure on those concessionaires. Next. That's traffic before MCO. Next. That's traffic during MCO. Yeah. Next. There's also been a severe impact on other forms of transport. Next. For public transport, we have road-based public transport. Next. Rail-based public transport. Next. We spent a lot of money on LRT and MRT systems. These are heavily used in the Klang Valley. Next. So what we found is that as a result of COVID-19, less people needing to commute, people concerned about their risk of infection in public spaces. There's been a 65% drop in ridership, even now when the CMCO has been announced. The traffic operators are enforcing social distancing, they're disinfecting vehicles and stations, they carry out commuter temperature screening, and what they've done is to spread out the peak period so that the crowd gets spread out. Next. And here we're giving you more details. So before MCO, it's million+ ridership per day on our public transport system in the Klang Valley. During MCO, you can see it varies between a 65 to 80% drop in ridership even now after things have opened up. As I mentioned earlier, the peak hours has increased by 1 hour. Rail services, the trains have to operate at no more than 50% of full commuter capacity, and the bus services have to operate no more than 30% of capacity to ensure social distancing during this period. Next. There's also been an impact on the port sector. Initially, essential goods were pushed out, but non-essential goods were held up at the ports. Within just a matter of days, the port capacity was totally filled up, and the ministry then had to push freight forwarders and haulage companies to clear the ports as quickly as possible. Next. Now, our port has signed up with 20 other ports in the world to keep seaborne trade open throughout this pandemic. Next. So in terms of the way forward, we have some short-term measures and some long-term measures. So in the short-term measures, the demand for public transport will increase. And as you go back to near normal travel demand patterns, it will be difficult to maintain social distancing. There's a new phenomenon now of queuing for trains, queuing for platforms, queuing to get in to the stations. So I think now improve travel information, telling people how long the queue times are at each station is very important so that people can plan for their transport better. There is a lot of contractual implications because of COVID-19, not just in transport sector, but in all sectors. And we are looking at potentially a COVID-19 Act. COVID-19 has given us maybe a once-in-a-lifetime chance to really map out environmental damage. Now our rivers are clean, our airs are clean. So what we're pushing for is increased monitoring and increased frequency of monitoring to see where the environmental loading is coming on, at what locations, at what time, and try to map it with the opening of a sector. So we can really determine what are the causes of environmental damage to our air and the rivers. In terms of long-term measures, we think that COVID-19 will have long-term impacts on travel demand, and we need to do a study to see the impact on each mode of transport. For construction, we have to reinforce less labor-intensive construction methods like IBS and MBS. And it's important now that we promote the e-economy, including the mandatory use of multi-lane free flow at our toll stations, all government and authority submissions to be now electronic going forward. And really in all contracts and ways of doing business, we need to formalize our digital interfaces. So video conferencing tools like what we're using now, electronic submissions will form part of the contracts going forward. Next. And the future of mobility, the work from home culture will grow. People will keep away from crowds and public spaces. We might see new innovative forms of public commuting. Bicycles might become more popular. People might use cars more and shy away from public transport, and people may use motorbikes more. There will be change. Let us embrace the change. Lastly, thank you very much, everyone. Be healthy and stay safe.
Thank you very much, Dennis, for this very comprehensive presentation. Now, it's also when we move on to the questions and answers session. It's going to be moderated by Christos Xenophontos from the USA, who is the chair of our Committee on Performance of Transport Administrations.
I will start with is how are the work and projects overseas affected, and do the recipient countries consider this pandemic as force majeure? And how do the contractors and clients settle this problem of delays, cost overrun, etc.?
So we've looked into this, and really the admissibility of COVID-19 as a force majeure event hasn't been argued in open court. I think you need to look at it contract by contract. Key things to look at is whether there is a pandemic or a disease clause in your force majeure definition. We have had some, in my mind, slightly perverse interpretations of the law, where most contractors will have to abide by the laws of the country. And a lot of, let's say, the movement control order was an act of a lawful act by the country. So what they're saying is, well, you have to abide by the laws of the country, and that's a lawful act. So it's not a force majeure. So there is this incredible variance of interpretation of this issue, and that's why the talk about a COVID-19 Act coming into place to kind of harmonize the interpretation of this is something that's widely debated and being considered. In the meantime, in Malaysia, prior to that coming on board, we have some other measures in place. So what we've done is to increase the bankruptcy threshold and protection. So it was 1 month before you can take action. Now we increased it to 6 months before you can take bankruptcy actions. The threshold minimum amount was also 10,000 ringgit. It's been increased to 50,000 ringgit. And also we've had some concessions in terms of when filings can be done. So prior to the act being in place, whether it will come or not, there's also actions that can be done. Thank you.
Dennis, thank you very much. That was really excellent information. And Dennis, the next question that we have is for you, and it's relative to, if you can tell us a little bit, please, about the Malaysian COVID-19 Act, and if authorities are ready to embrace the change.
I think I covered a little bit of the act earlier on when I talked about the force majeure issue and why, because of the various or the differing interpretation on whether or not COVID-19 is a force majeure, the need for the act, whether we'll do it is another issue. But in terms of the authorities' reaction to this, I think we can commend the Malaysian government in how they have reacted to the crisis. I think I've shown to you the very phased approach that we did, quite a uniform approach. It's forever evolving, it's forever changing, so they are being proactive to deal with the changes. And there are going to be new challenges coming along, and we're going to have to address them as they come along. For instance, social distancing is working at the moment now in public transport, but that's because demand is low. You know, in the next literally weeks, so very, very soon, public transport is going to increase significantly. So we're going to have to see how to manage social distancing in those areas. And what I can say is the Malaysian government has been quite proactive in trying as best they can to deal with issues as they arise. Of course, there will always be a debate, did they do too much or too little? And no one will know for sure, but at least we acted with resolve and in one direction. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dennis. We also have one more question to you relative to the experience in Malaysia, and it's relative to the widespread, is there widespread testing of workers around the construction sites, and how do you deal with the infection clusters around the sites?
Okay. Let's talk about testing in general first. So we're doing about 16,000 tests a day in the country, and we hope to increase that to about 22,000 tests a day in the next couple of weeks. So that's not as high as in some developed countries, but it's really the third highest in the nation. In terms of type of testing, we've strictly followed WHO guidelines, and all the results are published 12 p.m. daily by the Ministry of Health. So great transparency in this. Also, it's targeted testing. So there's certain countries where if you have a flu or cold, they just say go home, they don't test you. If anyone is at all suspected of having COVID, if you just show flu-like symptoms, you are asked to be tested. So there is a real effort to try to get to the correct figure. Let's start with that, okay? Now, recently there's been a guideline that no one can start work before they are tested. So all the workers have to go for COVID testing. As I mentioned earlier in my talk, there is free government testing for nationals, but there's a long queue for that. So for the contractors, they have to wait, decide whether it's better to wait for the free testing, which costs $100 or to start work and pay for the test themselves. And by and large, what we're finding is that most contractors are just paying for the test to be done themselves so that they can start work immediately. So in this way, we're trying to avoid clusters happening at construction sites. In the previous cases where we already have had clusters happening at construction sites, it's an immediate shutdown of that site. It's called an enhanced movement control order area. So they literally put barbed wire around those areas, and people are not allowed to come in and out except for emergency services and of course a supply of essentials. And then within those enhanced movement control order areas, we also make sure there is social distancing kept. And everyone in there goes for mandatory testing, and it's not lifted till everyone is cleared from mandatory testing and the cases drop in those areas.
Thank you so much, Dennis. And we'd like to save one question that we ask all of our panelists that spurs a little bit of discussion. So our next question, it is, if workers go dispersed, is there a loss of skills, and how is that handled? Dennis?
Christos, yes. I think when you talk about dispersal of workers, there's the immediate problem. And the immediate problem is not really one of loss of skills, but the humanity problem. So we have people which are hungry and homeless. So that's as immediate thing is what we have to deal with first. And there we have some very heartwarming stories about how subcons are not able to pay or house their workers, and main cons adopting these workers and housing them and feeding them and giving them a little bit of money to send home, because it's not just hunger for them, but hunger for their families back in whatever home countries they are. So I think when we talk about displaced workers, it's that immediate problem we have to deal with first. The loss of skills, I think, is part of a bigger problem. And what we're pushing for, really, even before COVID, but very much because of COVID, is for less labor-intensive methods of construction. So for instance, we're driving very hard for the adoption of modular building systems, where essentially complete units are built in a factory, including tiling, including windows, including electricals and plumbing and all that, and then just taken to site and just bolted out at site. So in terms of site activity, it's very, very much less. So I think we should be pushing for those new skills rather than focusing on loss of the old skills. Christos, will there be a chance for us to do closing remarks as well, or should I do mine now?
We really haven't done it in the past, but please go ahead.
Okay, so really, Christos and Patrick and PIARC, thank you very much for this sharing session. I think most of us in the world haven't come across a pandemic, an issue like this before. So you can either say we are reinventing the wheel every day, or we're just making it up as we go along. So it's very important that across the world, we can share our experiences so that we can come together as humanity to fight this problem together. On our part, we've done a lot of work on this. We've got a lot of advisory work, not just the slides that we presented, but also we have a lot of guidelines which we produce, which we disseminate free to the industry players. If you would like that information, you can write to me at DennisG, DENNISG @minconsult.com, and we freely share this information with you. We don't charge anything for it, but I do think I might charge Patrick a nice bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon next time I'm in Paris for agreeing to do this. Thank you.
I think, Danny, very much. I would like to thank all of our presenters for the excellent material that they shared with us today. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day ahead.